Lesson 3: Perception and Individual Decision Making. 3.1 Learning Objectives. The primary goal of this lecture is to comprehend perception and attribution theory in depth. After going through this lesson, the learner will be able to comprehend the following: perception and its process, biases in perception, and three-stage perception process, the theory of attribution and its consequential determinants, how to apply the rational framework of decision making, identify the shortcuts individuals use in making judgments about others. Opening case study: Buzz09's algorithm for social media posting. Data analysts differ from ordinary people in clear ways. They frequently have particularly strong mathematical orientations and find it distressing to consider losing hundreds or even millions of dollars on a poor wager. Depending on variables they have little control over, their careers may advance or decline. Ankit Kashyap stands out even with this unique group. He is the CEO and co-chair of the agency based out in Delhi, and he is just 27 years old. Mr. Kumar launched Buzz09, the digital ecosystem, after earning his MBA from Ambedkar University, Delhi, together with two other recent college grads, Kushal Gupta and Ambuj Agarwal, and a third partner, Venu Kashyap, who was still a student. Of course, Kumar and his fellow partners are too young to be running a Delhi-based social media agency. The method they're using is much more intriguing. Analytics are a skill that all social media managers possess. Buzz09 stands out because of how far the company has gone with them. To really make buy, sell, or hold choices and to learn from its errors. The company has handed over computers to each of its employees as well as access to Hootsuite, which automatically posts creative on social media just by linking a client's social media account to it. According to Mr. Kumar, it's quite obvious that humans aren't becoming any better. But technology and social media algorithms are becoming more reliable. Due to the profits Buzz9 was able to provide, other businesses like Rep Delhi's and ABC's company advisors decided to follow suit. According to proponents, computers outperform people because they can process schedules more rapidly, learn what functions, and change more easily and objectively. To assess social media content, Buzz09's software examines more than 10 years worth of social media data as well as the most recent market trends. When the algorithm shows that the number of impressions is declining, it automatically adjusts the schedules of online posting. Also, based on the library of images fed to the system, it automatically creates design for its clients' social media accounts. Leaders of the Buzz09 have confidence in their artificial intelligence (AI) strategy. Mr. Kashyap believes in challenging AI as it purviews tech innovative strategies to the company and its clients. Not just social media posting decision is being replaced by machines, computers are progressively replacing and even replacing human judgment in a variety of tasks, including operating nuclear power plants, hedge funds decision, piloting airplanes, and making medical judgments. Not everyone believes AI always outperforms human reasoning and decision making. Some claim that the use of computers makes complicated systems more prone to mistakes since no computer can foresee every circumstance and people perform worse as the passive observers that AI transforms them into. By Robbins and Judge, 2013. When the human has no participation in the activity, there is a far larger risk of complacency, observes the pilot of one's complicated system. 3.2 Introduction. The opening case study, Buzz09's algorithm for social media posting, as mentioned above, demonstrates a few of the issues that people encounter while seeking for strategies to improve their decision-making abilities. One of the reasons why some individuals favor rational decision making is the possibility that human decision makers may be biased or wrong in many ways. This chapter examines some of these biases in human decision making as well as the possibility that people may outperform computers, particularly in terms of innovation. 3.3 Perception. Through the process of perception, people organize and interpret their sensory experiences to give their surroundings meaning. However, there could be a significant discrepancy between what we perceive and what is real. For example, the whole employees of a company may agree that it's a great place to work because of the friendly office atmosphere, fascinating job assignments, competitive pay, first-rate benefits, and considerate management. However, as most of us are aware, it is rare to see such anonymity. Why is perception important in OB research so much? As opposed to reality, behavior is dependent on one's perspective of reality. Figure 3.1 explains the factors that influence perception. Factors in the situation, time, work setting, social setting. Factors in the perceiver, attitudes, motives, interests, experiences, expectations. Factors in the target, novelty, motion, sounds, size, background, proximity, similarity. How can we explain the fact that various people may observe the same thing and form quite different opinions about it? Many factors affect perception, sometimes skew it as well. The perceiver, the object, target being perceived, or the context which the perception is produced may all have these components or few of them, as explained in figure 3.1. Your attitudes, personality, aspirations, interests, prior experiences, and expectations all have a significant impact on how you interpret what you see while trying to understand a target. Regardless of their real features, you can see someone as authoritarian if you consider police officers to be that way, or as slow if you assume young people to be that way. The target's characteristics also influence how we see it. Silent individuals are less likely to stand out in a crowd than loud individuals. The link between a target and its backdrop, as well as our tendency to group nearby items and those with similar characteristics together, all influence perception since humans do not examine targets in isolation. Male and female, as well as members of any other group that can be quickly classified in other unrelated ways, frequently have something in common. How attentive we are can vary depending on the environment, including the time of day, location, light, temperature, and several other variables. Saturday versus Monday. On a Saturday night in a club, a young client dressed to the nines might not be there. But if that individual were dressed that way, you would see them in your management class on Monday morning, and that of the rest of the class. The perceiver, the person about whom we are projecting our perceptions, and the target are unaffected. On the other hand, Saturday night and Monday morning are two separate times. 3.3.1 Perception. Meaning. The core elements of the perception process are the choice, interpretation, and usage of inputs and signals. The high error rate of the process used to create perceptions is a serious drawback of perception. Think over the photos for a while. Figure 3.2 and 3.3. Figure 3.2 shows the standard physical perception assessments. Did you make the same mistakes that most people do? We are unable to see pictures appropriately even when we are aware of our error and can evaluate them objectively. Brand logos in figure 3.3 have a hidden message that once understood is difficult to forget. Perception alters what we perceive. It is a subject to error. Another example that highlights the power of perception is shown in figure 3.3. The figure reflects closure. It focuses on the gaps that people fill in to comprehend a stimulus. Even though we know the lines in forms like rectangles and triangles are crooked, we nonetheless fill them in. Therefore, closure is essential to how perception works. Most of the time, we don't know all the facts, so we fill in the blanks with assumptions. Closure enables us to analyze a blur or faded situation by completing that incomplete picture with the help of our experiences. Figure 3.2, 3.3 and 3.4 show the progression of perception. Social perception does use similar techniques. We draw conclusions based on our presumptions even when we cannot see everything. Figure 3.2, Common Perception Illusions. Figure 3.3, What do you perceive of these brands? Figure 3.4, Closure. What would you do? Situation 1. You're considering working for a company with extensive operations in India and Japan, understanding that having a strong command of Japanese will benefit you. You're currently enrolled in a Japanese language course that will improve your fundamental communication abilities. You're thinking whether to list this as one of your abilities because you anticipate being somewhat adept by the time you land the job. Would you include it in your resume? You are a proficient in data science and analysis. One of your new colleagues who really wants to learn this skill has shown an interest of finishing this skill from you. You think that the new joinee is not a quick learner and unable to grasp technical things. Considering this as one of your perception about him or her, what would you do? Think about how closure could impact a manager's perception of a worker. A boss who oversees 25 employees seldom interacts with any one of them. The manager, however, personally witnessed a contentious conversation between the employee and from a separate management department during the preceding 6 months after one client complained about a certain employee. However, during the previous 6 months, one client has voiced a complaint on a certain employee, and the manager has personally overheard a heated exchange between that employee and the management from a different department. Based on these two instances and the limited time available to gather further information, the manager may use closure to round out the picture and infer that the employee has a short attention span. Case study: India versus America. Consider the situation of American citizen Miss Thompson, who starts working for a major corporation in India. She meets with Mr. Roy, her boss, on the first day. Mr. Roy greets everyone and then begins to collect information about Miss Thompson's mother's relatives, siblings, father and grandfather's jobs. He devotes a lot of his time to family discussions that Miss Thompson deems inappropriate and unimportant. Miss Thompson is an expert at conducting interviews and avoiding personal questions. So she carefully avoids all these intrusive questions. During the hour-long meeting, she doesn't learn much about her duties or Mr. Roy's expectations. She's quite perplexed. Mr. Roy is unhappy and concerned that Miss Thompson is vague about her background and won't talk about her family from his perspective. How can she expect to connect with others if they don't know anything about her or her family? Before knowing someone's personal background, he cannot trust them. In this scenario, both sides evaluate the situation from their own cultural vantage points. The Spanish social structure and ties to family and friends holds the key. Roy on the other side, Miss Thompson is used to working in an American environment where private things are inappropriate and unimportant. Giving her cultural background, Miss Thompson is appropriately avoiding these personal challenges, but Mr. Roy is only striving to show that his new employee has the necessary and core family background to be trustworthy. The cultural misconceptions in this scenario appear to be based on a variety of conventions and assumptions. 3.3.2 Perception, the three stages. The three stages of perception are presented in the figure 3.5. Perception is a multidimensional process as seen in figure 3.5. In this section, we examine each of the three stages and consider the factors that affect them. Figure 3.5, the three stages of perception. First, attention stage. Paying attention to the surroundings is a necessary initial step in the perception process. Understanding environmental cues is a crucial stage in the process of perception. During the attentional phase of perception, we select which stimuli, cues, and signals to focus on. What do we notice? What grabs our attention? For instance, while your professor takes a brief break from class to look over his notes, you could catch a glimpse of his keys jingling in his pocket. You could then notice his unusually baggy pants because of the noise that comes out of his keys. In each of these cases, an uncommon event draws attention and may cause individuals to divert their focus from what they are doing. In the attention stage of perception, we may choose consciously or unconsciously what to focus on. The perceptual filter is a technique for allowing certain information to pass while excluding others. Selective attention, or the fact that we pay attention to some social and physical cues but not others, is the core element of the perceptual filter. During the attention stage, a multitude of factors determine what information passes through our perceptual filter. In addition to culture, salience is another factor. Salient cues are those that stand out in some way. Salient elements and signals have a greater part in our perception process than other signals do since we use them. In the samples, the jingling keys, baggy clothing, southern accent, tattoos, and body piercings all stuck out. The stimulus's intensity is another factor that affects salience. You're likely to pay greater attention to someone who speaks loudly, wears a striking apparel, or applies a strong perfume. For instance, people who wear bright colors when they dress are more likely to be remembered after a meeting, though not always favorably. Aside from that, cultural differences may play a role in why some events remain in our recollections. For instance, standing close to someone while speaking is normal in Middle Eastern and Mediterranean cultures. These acts are not observed in other cultures. In contrast, the same gesture is typically unheard of in the United States, where people become uneasy if a co-worker speaks to them too near or touches their arm or shoulder. That co-worker's actions are obvious, which increases the likelihood that you will see them and recall them. The people in each of these cases stand out, prompting us to remember them and form opinions about them. They impede our perceptual filter due to their prominence. This is not to argue that you must try to stand out to be better remembered. People could recall you more vividly, but they can also hold your harsher behavior against you. We must organize the cues and the material that draws our attention into sets that make sense and that we may use later. Case study: an Indo-American woman CEO in India. When Malti, a 1975 passed out from Harvard Business School, who spent her entire life in the United States since her childhood, joined ABS in 1977, she questioned long-held views on both sides of the Indian thinking, mostly bureaucratic and paternalistic society back then, which was her ultimate glass ceiling cracking moment. ABS, an enterprise that owns the several educational institutions worldwide, was being operated by Malti, who also served as its first female CEO. Around 17,000 individuals were employed at ABS at that time. Malti's credentials were out of the ordinary for a top executive of an Indian corporation. Having no prior experience in control of a large, multi-billion dollar global organization while being a Texas native born in India, a former attorney, and a former journalist. Following Malti's arrival, ABS's equity returns significantly lagged those of its competitors. The successes of Malti's predecessor, who held the position for 15 years until retiring in 1977, included increasing ABS's workforce, doubling its profitability, experiencing a more than 80% increase in share prices, and converting a struggle company into a global powerhouse. How did this implausible outsider from another continent work for a very conservative company in India and became one of the most respected CEOs there? Upon finishing business school in 1975, Malti relocated to West Virginia and started working for the Associated Press. She then created a Pulitzer-winning newspaper in Georgia with her husband. The two relocated to India in 1977 when the newspaper went out of business, becoming CEO of ABS, where she grew sales by 130% in just 4 years. Malti admits that she faced skepticism when working at ABS. I had analysts in one on the first day and I could hear them asking, "Who is this person?" Then I started to wonder, who is this person? But she moved quickly to establish her reputation and grow the company. During her first week on the job, she issued an introductory email to all 17,000 employees. I function best in a workplace that is upbeat, enthusiastic, and full of comedy. I do not want to be linked with a firm that is not reputable and fair, the employee said after just 7 months on the go. When she started that she wanted to double ABS market worth, the company's share surged. She promised that more changes will be made. However, for the time being, our objective is to enhance overall corporate performance. Malti usually wore khadi clothing to meetings and used Indian slangs. It was clear that she had no reservations about grabbing attention. She was referred to the ABS chairperson as an enthusiast and exuberant. Because of her egalitarian viewpoint, she contrasted with the traditional Indian thinking. In her words, "I don't even use that phrase because, first of all, that's what old people do, and second of all, it's what you do after dinner." She expresses that she is not ready to retire at age 66. Through her blunders, she discovered that you may fail, but you don't die. Malti's issues and career serve as an illustration of how perception affects businesses. To carry out her responsibilities as the leader of a big company, she has had to contend with gender, cultural, and social stereotypes as well as public perceptions. Her success has been greatly influenced by her capacity to understand herself, other people, and her environment. Malti had to observe people and events, gather knowledge, assess that knowledge, and generate opinions based on a range of subjective interpretation as well as factual facts. All leaders must act in this manner. To be effective, she needed to manage how other people perceived her. That is significant. In-text questions. First, perception is a dash. A. Scientific process. B. Mental process. C. Both A and B. D. None. Second, which process fundamental components are stimulus selection, interpretation, and use? A. Perception. B. Organizational development. C. Locus of control. D. Ethics. Third, dash permits us to assess a fading circumstance by filling that partial image based on our experiences. A. Closure. B. Creativity. C. Communication. D. Connotation. Second, organization stage. The second step of the perceptual process is organization. The data that our filters have permitted through must now be organized. We group information into sets that make sense, are practical, and are organized. We create new sets, build new links between the various parts, classify newly found information into pre existing, well known categories, and combine things into bundles we can remember. Schemas. At this level, the primary activity is the use of schemas. Schemas, which are mental or cognitive models or patterns, are used by people to understand and explain situations and events. They act as structures that enable us to fill in the gaps in social contexts. For instance, during the closure phase, people use schemas to help fill in gaps in complete visualization. Although some of our schemas may be conscious to us, they usually operate subconsciously. Schemas at work. Schemas are beneficial since they hasten the information processing. They help us remember details and close gaps in our perception. Schemas greatly facilitate the organization of knowledge, which enhances our capacity to recall specifics about people and events. Because we use closure to fill in information we don't know and make snap decisions, schemas might lead to mistakes. Table 3.1, it explains the advantages and disadvantages of schema. Advantages: help us in recalling, provides information, structure information. Disadvantages: hard to modify, ignores information that does not fit, may lead to overinterpretation. Culture and schemas. When interacting with people, we must be aware of the likelihood that our preconceived notions will affect how we see them. Since certain information fits into pre-existing schemas, it may be quickly sorted and saved. Additional information might not fit into a given structure. This might lead to the creation of a new schema or cause things that should not be remembered because they contradict our beliefs and may not fit into any pre-existing categories. For instance, many women have experienced having their male co-workers either forget their comments or blame them on their male co-workers when they made suggestions or comments during meetings. These assumptions were something Malti had to cope with. Third, interpretation and judgment stage. In the interpretation and judgment stage of social perception, which is the third step, we interpret and translate the ordered information to establish its meaning. Figure 3.5. Through interpretation, we create an opinion or judgment about the subject or circumstance and ascertain the motivation behind the behavior. In firms where a manager's responsibilities include evaluating their team members, clients, vendors, and other business partners, this method is crucial. For instance, you see that your new employee is pleasant and courteous to everyone she meets and that she takes the time to get to know them. You ponder whether she is simply behaving in a typical manner. Whether they begin a new job or not, she is a very pleasant and sociable individual. To decide, you must determine a justification for her actions, which is the process attribution we'll explore next. Also, look at figure 3.6 for more specific information. In-text questions. Fourth, what comes last in the process of perception? A. Results. B. Judgment and interpretation. C. Selection. D. Consistency. Fifth, which element enhance the process of processing information? A. Filters. B. Schema. C. Perception. D. Prejudice. Sixth, choose the wrong option. A. Distinctiveness. B. Consensus. C. Consistency. D. Selective filters. 3.4. The attribution process. The act of assuming a cause for a behavior and presenting that cause is known as the attribution process. One of the initial steps in the attribution process is determining whether an action's cause is internal or external. See figure 3.6. An internal attribution is when you suggest that the person's actions are the result of something inside the person. These are either more or less stable factors such as personality, morality, or intrinsic skill, such as effort or motivation. Internal attributions, which places a strong emphasis on the individual, are occasionally referred to as personal attributions. When we think that factors outside of the person are the cause of behavior, such as Mary is late for work because she is lazy, or Sergio did well on the test because he worked hard, we establish external attributions. These factors might include the surrounding natural environment, the difficulty of the job, the workplace culture, the presence and behavior of other people, or even luck. Since they link behavior to its environment, external attributions are often referred to as situational attribution. External attributions are mostly dependent on task difficulty and chance, but internal attributions are based on ability and effort. Internal versus external attributions at work. Like us all, managers are prone to apply internal attributions excessively and external attributions insufficiently. For instance, supervisors who are evaluating employees are more prone to conclude that low performance is due to lack of skill, effort, or motivation. They are much less inclined to attribute poor leadership to contextual factors such as insufficient training, insufficient support from co-workers, insufficient tools, or even their own subpar performance. Figure 3.6. It explains the interpretation and judgment stage. Attribution. 3.4.1. Three types of information in attribution. When determining internal or external attributions, we use three types of information: uniqueness, consensus, and consistency. First, distinctiveness. We initially consider if the behavior is unique to a certain profession or situation. Does the individual always behave in this way? If the answer is yes, we'll probably hold that person accountable for their actions. If not, we can consider external influences. Consider how a manager appraising his employees may consider how distinct each employee's performance histories are to illustrate how this component functions in an organizational setting. Or, are computer-related jobs the only ones where they perform well? Do they perform similarly across the board? If the performance is particular to one or a few tasks and is therefore specific to a scenario, and external attribution is more plausible. Is this a typical behavior, or is this person acting strangely? Is the employee in question the sole member of the team that is having issues with the new method after the bad performance was addressed? If other individuals behave in a similar way, demonstrating that there is agreement, we are more likely to assign something to the outside world. Third, consistency. Depending on what is constant, we can ascribe anything to either the internal or external reality. Without consistency, we find it difficult to make any kind of judgment. Assigning responsibility calls for extreme consistency. It would be challenging for management to assign blame to a worker whose performance differs significantly from month to month and from task to task. 3.4.2. Attribution through behaviors. Researchers have shown that even though we have more information about ourselves than about others, we usually use the same approaches to identify the root causes of our difficulties. We consider our actions and behaviors and extrapolate our thoughts and aims from them to understand why we operate in the manner that we do. Self-perception theory is the name given to this theory. According to self-perception theory, when asked to explain their own behavior, people tend to search both inside and outside of themselves for answers. The self-perception theory of attribution has surprising findings. Consider how we behave when we are recognized for our work and given a reward. For instance, how would a professional basketball player justify his performance if he received a significant bonus for playing well? Would he say he loved the game so much, or would he say the big bonus was the reason he won? How would the worker who regularly lends a helping hand to other workers without getting paid for it defend her actions? It's noteworthy that when we receive large monetary compensation or positive public attention for our efforts, we are more likely to blame our actions on the outside reward. Over justification refers to the tendency to blame our own behavior on outside forces after getting an external benefit. Over justification has several negative effects on managers. It suggests that giving people significant external incentives for finishing pleasant tasks may reduce their internal motivation to complete the task. If the reward is strong and meaningful enough, people are more likely to make an external attribution. That is, to place blame for their actions on something other than their own motivations. Because of this, employees may become less motivated to achieve internally and may perform less successfully unless they continue to get significant incentives. This practice may provide one explanation for why some professional athletes perform badly despite being paid well. Managers should emphasize internal features and make them obvious whenever possible to maintain employee internal motivation and interests. High amounts of praise and reward from the public may have an immediate effect, but they can have the opposite effect in the long run. In-text questions. 7th, assuming an explanation for a behavior and advancing that reason is known as A. Attribution process, B. Consistency, C. Distinctiveness, D. Consensus. 8th, personal attributions are related to A. External attributions, B. Societal attributions, C. Internal attributions, D. Physical attributions. 9th, situational attributions are A. External attributions, B. Societal attributions, C. Internal attributions, D. Physical attributions. 10th, to understand why we behave in the way that we do, we consider our actions and behaviors and extrapolate our attitudes and aims from them. This concept is known as A. Self-evaluation, B. Self-role, C. Self-organized, D. Self-parameters. 11th, after earning an external incentive, we tend to blame outside forces of our own conduct. A. Undersimplification, B. Overanalysis, C. Underanalysis, D. Overjustification. 12th, dash is the final element of the attribution process. A. Conscience, B. Concept, C. Concordance, D. None of the above. 13th, we are inclined to attribute something externally if other people act similarly, indicating that there is agreement. This is related to A. Distinctiveness, B. Consensus, C. Consistency, D. All of the above. 3.5 Perceptual basis. Common shortcuts in judging others. We discussed how people often attribute other people's behavior by exaggerating their own personal traits and underestimating external factors. This tendency is known as the fundamental attribution error. For instance, if your boss is unresponsive, you are more likely to blame his lack of people skills or propensity for being cold and distant than you are to blame the expectations placed on him or the amount of work he must do. In this way, you are more likely to attribute a co-worker's obstructionist behavior to her personality than to a lack of communication. These accusations make us less likely to see others favorably. Table 3.2. This explains the various perceptual biases. First, fundamental attribution error. Undervaluing situational factors and overvaluing personal factors while making attributions about others' actions. Second, actor-observer differences. An inclination to rely more on third-party explanation for our own behavior. Third, stereotypes. A generalization made about a person based on the group they belong to. Fourth, halo or horn effect. In multi-attribute stimuli, use of a single attribute to influence the overall assessment, positive or negative, of the stimuli. Fifth, similar to me effect. A tendency to like someone who we think is like us and to dislike or not like someone who is different. Sixth, primacy and recency. A propensity to place an excessive emphasis on either the most recent information in the case of primacy or the least recent information in the case of recency. Seventh, self-serving biases. The propensity to give success credit and deny failure blame. Case study: Trayvon Martin. The Trayvon Martin case featured a significant amount of perception and prejudices in the Florida, United States. Martin was wearing a hoodie the night he was shot, demonstrating how even something so basic may affect how we perceive people. There might be negative consequences from the fundamental attribution error. Because of this propensity, we frequently internalize victims mistakenly and blame them for their suffering. For instance, in the well-publicized case of the Florida teenager who was shot by a self-appointed neighborhood watchman, the fact that Trayvon Martin was wearing a hoodie became the focus point, obscuring many of the crucial issues. When assessing people, we typically focus on internal factors. The fundamental attribution error, however, works in the other direction. When we try to justify our own behavior, we rely more on external justifications to support our own actions. This process is known as the actor-observer difference. In addition to making internal attributions about other people's behavior, which is a common fundamental attribution error, we also commonly make external attributions about our own behavior. The differentiation is brought about by the numerous perspectives that come from having access to different kinds of information. Contrary to how others may see us, we are aware of our own history and how we respond in different situations. As a result, we often have different perspectives than observers on how distinctive and consistent our own behavior is. Because actors and observers have different perspectives, actors are more likely to ascribe external causes because environmental impacts are more apparent to actors than to observers. Figure 3.7. Women taking part in marathon in Pakistan. These young ladies, figure 3.7, are participating in a recruitment process for a police force in Peshawar, Pakistan. However, because the profession is widely seen as a vocation that is exclusively for men, women in America and European, Eastern European, Asian and Latin American nations complain that gender stereotyping makes it difficult for them to enter the field. The stereotype perception of women wrongly generalizes them being unfitted to carry out police work. Even in nations like the United States, where the law demands employing police officers without regard to gender. Women who wish to work in law enforcement, however, argue that they meet the physical standards and even offer unique attributes to the position, such as compassion and effective communication skills. A stereotype is a generalization made about a person based on their membership in a certain group. Race, gender, sexual orientation, functional area, and other categories may be among these groupings. Because of their strength, stereotypes can make it difficult for us to recognize individual distinctions and achievements. Consider the challenges that Malti, a ABS employee, faced. Since her first day on the job, the British media has questioned her credentials and aptitude for the role. How a mother of three could run a big British firm was a concern for some. Her spouse was mocked by others, who called him the house husband. Even more than Malti's creativity and strategic foresight, the company's male leaders were given credit for many of her excellent decisions. With her engaging humor and deft people skills, Malti debunked the cliches. The halo effect, also known as the horn effect, occurs when a general opinion or assessment of one aspect of a person or circumstance result in either a halo, which is a favorable impression, or horns, which is an unfavorable impression, and which then serves as the focal point around which all additional information is selected, arranged, and interpreted. For instance, a study done in the United Kingdom discovered that a person's first name might have a big impact on how they are seen. Another example is when someone identifies themselves as an Apple or Google employee. Because of the reputation of these companies, we are likely to form an opinion of the person immediately away. A strong element that might result in a halo or horn is the similar to me effect. The similar to me effect occurs when we like someone we believe to be similar to ourselves and dislike someone we believe to be distinct from us. In a multicultural environment, lack of likeness may be extremely problematic when the other person is likely to be different and as a result, perhaps unlikable. Do you believe that first impressions are important? If you say that, you are correct. The importance of initial impressions is referred to as the primacy effect. It speaks about a tendency to exaggerate fresh knowledge. Early information is often recalled and the recently affects subsequent perceptions. In contrast to the primacy effect, the recency effect leads us to focus more on the latest information. The recency effect is most prevalent when there is a temporal gap between the earlier and later information. The tendency to accept credit for our successes but reject accountability for our errors is known as the self-serving bias. On the one hand, when we do poorly on a test, fumble a presentation, lose a client, or fall short of our objectives, we frequently attribute external blame rather than internal attribution on our own lack of effort or skill. We blame the unfair professor, the disinterested audience, the finicky client, or the unachievable company goals. The sum of all the prejudices makes the relationship between managers and their employees fascinating. Stereotypes, halo, horns, and primacy recency may bias the data that managers gather. Additionally, managers usually blame employees' incompetence and lack of effort for poor performance, whereas employees blame managers' poor managing skills. However, since they are so confident in their own abilities and commitment to success, both sides frequently fail to recognize the contributions made by the opposing party. Perceptual biases allow us to perceive social situations quickly and accurately, but they can also result in errors. 3.6 Applications of perceptual biases or shortcuts in organizations. People in companies are constantly evaluating one another. Managers are required to evaluate the work of their staff. We assess the level of efforts each of our co-workers is putting out in their task. members of the team assess a newcomer right away. Our decisions frequently have substantial ramifications for the organization. Let's examine the most straightforward examples. Employee interview. Most hiring decisions involve an interview. However, interviewers frequently form false perceptions and form hasty impressions that stick with them. According to research, we establish opinions about people in less than a tenth of a second based on our initial impressions. If these initial thoughts are unfavorable, they frequently carry more weight in the interview than if they were revealed later. After the first 4 or 5 minutes of an interview, many interviewers' decisions don't vary all that much. Because of this, information gathered earlier in the interview is given more weight than information gathered later. A good candidate is therefore likely defined more by the absence of bad traits than by the existence of favorable ones. Performance expectations. Even when their perceptions of reality are flawed, people nonetheless try to justify them. The concepts of self-fulfilling prophecy and the Pygmalion effect are used to illustrate how a person's conduct is influenced by the expectations of others. A manager won't likely be let down if she has a high expectation for their staff. Like this, if she merely expects mediocre performance, they will probably live up to her low standards. Expectations are fulfilled. It has been discovered that the self-fulfilling prophecy has an impact on how well accountants, warriors, and even students perform. Performance evaluation. Performance evaluations will be covered in more detail later. But for now, it is important to realize that they heavily rely on the perceptual process. Promotion, wage increases, and continued employment are some of the most evident results that are directly related to an employee's future and are determined by the evaluation. Many tasks are evaluated subjectively, even though the assessment might be objective. For instance, a salesperson is evaluated based on how much revenue he earns in his region. Even though they are frequently important, subjective assessments are troublesome since they are affected by all the flaws we've covered so far, including selective perception, contrast effects, halo effects, and more. Ironically, performance reviews may reveal just as much about the assessor as they do about the employee. In-text questions. 14th. Which sort of bias is the tendency to accept credit for our successes but reject accountability for our failures? A. Self-error. B. Self-recency. C. Self-serving. D. Self-primacy. 15th. A generalization about a person's based on the group they are part of is A. Prejudice. B. Stereotype. C. Assumption. D. Observation. 3.7. Individual differences and organizational constraints. Here, we focus on the variables that affect people's decision-making processes and their susceptibility to biases and mistakes. We talk about organizational and personal limitations. First, individual differences. The use of intuition, frequent biases, and mistakes and bounded rationality are characteristics of decision making in practice. Individual variations also lead to departures from the rational paradigm. We examine gender and personality differences in this area. Personality. Personality plays a critical role in defining perceptions. For instance, people with high self-esteem tend to follow a self-serving bias. It means that they accept the credit for success but blame others if they fail. Therefore, personality allows individuals to perceive in some ways that are limited to their personal traits. Gender is another individual characteristic that influences decision making. For instance, women ruminate more than men. You may anticipate that those with greater level of mental capacity would be less prone to frequent judgment mistakes, given that we know they can process information more rapidly, solve problems more precisely, and learn quicker. However, it seems that only some of these may be avoided by persons with mental capacity. Time orientation, the value based on reason, the conviction that individuals can solve issues, and the propensity for group decision making are all cultural differences. We may better understand why Indian managers make choices considerably more slowly and deliberately than American managers by examining differences in time orientation. In India, reason is respected, although this is not universally true. Second, organizational constraints. Employee evaluation. The standards by which employees are judged have a big impact on managers. We shouldn't be shocked to discover that a division manager's plant managers spend a significant portion of their time making sure that bad information doesn't reach him if he feels that the manufacturing facilities under his supervision operate best when he hears nothing unfavorable. All companies establish rules and regulations to guide choices and influence behavior. They naturally restrict the options for making decisions as a result. Employee decisions at McDonald's location across the world are influenced by formal restrictions. Employees at McDonald's restaurant, like the one in this photo who is making McCafe mocha, are expected to behave in a certain way. To maintain the company's high standards for food quality and safety as well as dependable and welcoming service, McDonald's expects staff to abide by rules and regulations for food preparation and service. For instance, McDonald's mandates that every shop perform 72 safety practices as part of a daily monitoring schedule for restaurant managers. 3.8 Ethics in Decision Making. Tata brings back Air India. Tatas have recently taken over Air India. Air India was founded by Dadabhai Tata back in 1932. In 1953, the Government of India passed the Air Corporations Act to purchase a majority stake in the airline carrier from Tata Sons. Its founder, J.R.D. Tata, continued as the chairman till 1977. However, from 2006 onwards, Air India started to incur heavy losses even after merging with Indian Airlines. The combined losses for Air India and Indian Airlines were rising exponentially every year. In January 2022, Tata brought back one of the ventures that was started by its stalwarts. Questions. First, are the perception of this acquisition negative or positive? Explain why. Second, what type of individual and organizational constraints did Tata face? Utilitarianism, which promotes making decisions only based on their outcomes in an effort to maximize the good for the greatest number of people, is the first ethical standard. This view dominates businesses in decision making. It is consistent with goals like great profitability, productivity, and effectiveness. Another ethical need is to make decisions in conformity with the basic freedoms and rights contained in documents like the Bill of Rights. The recognition and defense of essential liberties possessed by people, such as the right to due process, free expression, and privacy, are required when placing a focus on rights in decision making. This standard protects whistleblowers who make use of their freedom to speech to alert the public or media to an organization's unethical behavior. A third need for laws to be justly or equitably distributed in terms of costs and benefits is that they are applied in a fair and unbiased manner, also known as justice. Typically, this viewpoint is shared by union members. It advocates paying everyone the same wage for given post regardless of differences in performance and relying heavily on seniority in layoff decisions. Each criterion has advantages and disadvantages. A utilitarian worldview may promote efficiency and production, but it also has the potential to diminish some people's rights, particularly those of people of color. Rights are used to safeguard individuals from damage and are compatible with the freedom and privacy. But they may also encourage a legalistic environment that lowers productivity and efficiency. An emphasis on justice protects the rights of the underrepresented and weaker, but it may also encourage a sense of entitlement that hinders innovation, risk taking, and productivity. 3.9 Summary. In this lesson, you have learned: first, the process of perception is inherently flawed and skewed. Second, because culture adds complexity and usually provides an unexpected scenario, cross cultural interactions are particularly susceptible to perception errors. Third, each person has predetermined ideas about a specific group. As a result, give your stereotype some thought. Fourth, relying solely on recollection may cause us to make judgments that are prejudiced in an organizational setting. To prevent biases and inaccuracies from clouding your judgment and causing mistakes, make notes on significant events and issues. Fifth, role of perceptual biases are important to understand in managerial decisions making and many other administrative situations. Thank you for listening.